Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for making it to today's event. We're joined by Elizabeth and Zia from Long Mungalji LLP, which is a law-based firm in Toronto. Long Mungalji LLP lawyers specialize in immigration law. They are certified lawyers. They worked with SOGS over the past 7 years, and I'm glad to see them join us again in 2022. They'll be covering a lot of topics from postgraduate work permit, permanent residency, working in Canada, and they'll be available to answer all your questions towards the end of this event. So without further ado, I hand it over to Elizabeth.
Well, thank you so much, Varun. It's great to be back and to see that the international student group is back in full force this year. So today we're going to be talking about permanent residence. But before we start talking about permanent residence, it's very important that we start the conversation about temporary residence, because it's very important for you guys to understand what you guys need to do right now to maintain your status and to work, get your work permit, and etc., and move on to get permanent residence.
So the first thing we want to talk about is making sure that you keep your status while you're here in Canada. Very important that throughout your entire stay here, that you make sure that you have status always. Now, one important tip is that when you have a study permit or work permit and you're nearing the end of that, there is a concept called implied or maintained status. Now, this is where you've submitted an extension application and you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. You'll hold what's called implied or maintained status. This means that you can continue studying or working pursuant to the conditions of your initial permit while you wait for a decision on that extension application. So for example, if you hold a study permit, your study permit's expiring, you want to make sure before that expiry date, you submit your extension application. While you're waiting for a decision on that study permit extension, you'll be able to continue studying, right? So you'll be able to continue doing exactly what you were doing before your study permit expired, and you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status. One important note, though, very important, is that you only get implied status if you submit a complete application properly. So for example, if you forget to pay your fees, that's considered an incomplete application, right? You can't apply for a study permit extension without paying the appropriate fees. What happens then is that you have lost your status. So if you don't apply, or if you apply incorrectly, you don't get implied status, and instead you have lost your status. Now, if it does happen, okay, don't worry, there is still what's called restoration. So this means for someone who has lost their status, let's say you forgot, right? You thought that your study permit was expiring on another date, but really it has already expired. There is what's called restoration. So this is for individuals who have lost their status. They can apply to get your status back, okay? Now, really important though, there's a timeline in which you have to submit your restoration application. So from the day that you lose status, you have 90 days to apply for restoration. So let's go through a couple examples here. Let's say you have a study permit and it's expiring on March 1st, okay? As long as you submit your extension application before March 1st, so let's say February 20th, for example, you'll hold what's called implied status until you receive a decision on that extension application. So long as you submitted a complete application, you submitted it properly. If you miss March 1st, it's now March 5th, and you realize, oh no, I missed my deadline to submit my extension application. For 90 days from March 1st, you'll be able to submit a restoration application. Okay, so this is to get your status back. Now, let's say on February 20th, you submitted your extension application, but you made a mistake and didn't submit the right fees. So now you have a decision that you got back from IRCC saying, you know what, you didn't apply properly. That means from March 1st, you still only have the 90-day timeline to submit your restoration, okay? So keep in mind when you have to submit your extension application by and your restoration timeline in case you do miss that.
So Zia, one of the things that we should make clear to them is what is required for an officer to say that you actually submitted your application properly compared to when an officer may reject your study permit. Because, you know, or when you apply for a study permit, if you apply improperly, where you submitted the wrong forms or the wrong fees, or maybe you didn't even press the button right, then it's as if you didn't submit it at all. But sometimes you may not have all the documents right away, but your time is up, your study permit is up, right? And you need to file an extension of your study permit. In those kind of situations, as long as you submit the right form, you submit the right fee, let's say your passport, you need to get a new passport and it hasn't come yet, okay? Or let's say you don't have a letter from the school confirming that you are enrolled yet. It'll come, it's just not yet, okay? It's still worth it to submit it before your status ends, okay? If you submit before your status ends, it'll take a while for your study permit to be processed, and you can always update your application with that, okay? Even if your passport doesn't come and the officer looks at your application and denies your application, the restoration status starts when your application is denied instead of when your study permit is expired, right? So let's say, Zia, let's just wanted to clarify again. Let's say if my study permit expires April 30th and I applied before it expires, April 29th, I can continue to study.
Correct.
Right? As long as I paid the right fees, submitted the right form, I press that button, it's submitted. Okay. What if I don't get the right my new passport back in time and the officer gets to my application and it's denied on June 30th? Then,
So if you,
yeah.
No, go ahead.
So then what happens then?
Right. So if your application is refused on June 30th, then your restoration timeline starts from June 30th.
Right. So it's not that bad. Also, if I can always, put my passport through the web form and, submit it in as well. So the officer may see my new passport in time and issue my study permit. Okay. So keep this in mind, because oftentimes if you don't submit it before it expires, you can't study at all, right? You just have to wait and restoration within 90 days, but you may lose an entire semester. All right, so the second thing that we wanted you guys to understand is the difference between high skilled work and low skilled work. As you guys are going to school right now, you have the ability to work, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But there's a big difference when we move on to permanent residence for people to work in high skilled work compared to low skilled work. And this is how it's currently determined. Currently, the occupations are classified in what's called the NOC codes. Okay, so O, A, and B are high skilled, and C and D are low skilled. And you can Google NOC, National Occupation Classification Codes, and you can see, is what I am doing or what I was doing, or is this job offer going to be high skilled or low skilled? So if it is a high skilled work, O, A, and B, that's pretty good. C and D, you have to be very careful, because that may be a little bit of a waste of time in terms of immigration, because it's going to be difficult for you to get permanent residence. Certainly TA, RA work, that's all high skilled work, okay? Now, starting this year sometime, it's supposed to be implemented sometime, the government is going to come up with a new system called the tier system, okay? It's not spelled incorrectly, it's TEER, where they have 6 tiers, and they going to have 4 of them are going to be 0, 1 to 3 are going to be high skilled, and 5 and 6 are going to be low skilled. Compared to the current one, 3 of the occupations may no longer be classified as high skilled, but 16 new occupations may be classified as high skilled. All right.
So let's talk about that study permit and being able to, and what you need to know about the study permit. So some of the conditions that are on your study permit are obvious, like for example, the expiry date, okay? There are other conditions that are implied for your study permit. So for example, you must be actively pursuing your studies. So this means while you're here in Canada on your study permit, you do need to be making progress towards the completion of your program. If you stop, so if you decide to leave your program of study, or if you finish your program of study early, you actually lose status on that study permit. It becomes invalid, okay? So from the time that you stop studying, 90 days following the day that you stop studying, you lose, that study permit becomes invalid, okay? Now, there are 2 exceptions if you're on a scheduled break or if you're on an authorized leave. Now, when we're talking about a regularly scheduled break, it's one that is part of the school's academic calendar for your program. So it's not a break that you've decided. You know, if you decide, for example, that you want a semester off, that doesn't qualify as a regularly scheduled break. We do look to the school's calendar for your particular program. And the second exception is if you're on an authorized leave. So this is for individuals that have a particular reason that they need to take time off from school. You have to go to your program, you have to go to your school and actually get written authorization to be on a leave from your program of study, okay? So when you're on your study permit, you want to keep in mind that you have to be actively pursuing your studies, so making progress towards the completion of your program. And the only 2 exceptions to that are if you're on a scheduled break or if you're on an authorized leave. Now, a lot of you may have been studying outside of Canada during the pandemic on your study permit. If your classes are online or if they were online, up until this winter 2022 semester or summer 2022 semester, you are still eligible for the post-grad work permit. So this was a big question for, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, as to what happens to eligibility for the post-grad work permit. And Elizabeth will talk more about the post-grad work permit in a moment. But if you are studying online and outside of Canada, you'll still remain eligible for the post-grad work permit. And that should be up until the summer 2022 semester. Now, with that being said, when we talk about permanent residence and we look at the express entry system, right now there may be some issues qualifying for points for those of you who are studying outside of Canada and online. But again, we'll talk about that in more detail when we go into the express entry system. If you're in Canada, if you're a full-time student in Canada, you do actually have the ability to work off campus and on campus using that study permit. Now, the only restrictions you do have, though, are in terms of the number of hours that you work off campus using your study permit. So full-time students, and very important, it is only for full-time students. Full-time students are able to work off campus up to 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. So again, we see IRCC bringing up this concept of regularly scheduled break. So same definition, it's one that's part of your academic and school calendar, not one that you decide to take on your own. But again, the study permit does allow you to work up to 20 hours during the school year and full-time during any break. The exception to the requirement of being a full-time student is for your last semester. So while you are in your last semester of your program, if you only need a part-time course load, then you're still able to work off campus using that study permit, even though you may only be a part-time student during your final semester. Now, once you've completed your studies, and when I say completed your studies, what I mean by that is you've received any written confirmation from the school that you have finished your program requirements. So you're now no longer a full-time student. You do have to stop working immediately. Okay, so the study permit allows you to work off campus until the point in time when you have completed your program of study. As soon as you receive any written confirmation that you've finished your program, that ability to work off campus ends. Okay. Now, when we talk about written confirmation, it can be anything. It can be a letter from the school saying, congratulations, you're done your program. It can be your final transcripts or your final grades being released. Anything that indicates to you that you have finished your program. And really important, if your final grades are released, you can't just say, I haven't gone and checked my final grades, and so I can still work using that study permit. As soon as they are released, that means that you have to stop using your study permit to work off campus. Now, let's say you've completed your program, but you're going to be starting another program. Okay, so now you're in between, your summer in between your two programs of study. As long as you have been accepted into that subsequent program of study and the period of time between your two programs is less than 150 days, you're able to continue working full-time between your programs. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you have to stop. You are able to continue working off campus, using your study permit. You can work full-time as long as you have received acceptance to your second program, you still have a valid study permit, and the length of time between the two programs is 150 days. One additional note, if you're on an authorized leave, so if you have stopped studying, you're no longer a full-time student at that point in time. So any leave that you're on, you can't use your study permit to be working off campus.
Okay, so I just wanted to repeat what you've said about this, because I think it's super important. I think sometimes some people don't get it the first time. So let's have an example. I'm a student, I'm doing my thesis, and I'm going to defend my, my dissertation for my PhD. Let's say I'm just finished all my classes, I'm preparing to defend my dissertation. What is my status then?
You're still a full-time student, so you're still able to work using your study permit.
Okay. Now, let's say I've defended my dissertation. I don't have any results yet.
You're still a full-time student, still can work using your study permit.
Okay, and can I work full-time, part-time? What's the situation at that point?
You can work part-time, so up to 20 hours a week.
Okay, so then I've received, hooray, I got it passed by the school, and they said I've completed my program.
So now you're no longer a full-time student and you have to stop working using your study permit.
Okay, and then, and this is a segue to my part, which is next, which is going to be the post-grad work permit. When I've applied for the post-grad work permit, I can then work.
Yes, you can start working full-time.
Okay, all right, post-grad work permits, guys. Post-grad work permit, most of you probably heard about it. What I want to say about it, first of all, it is your golden ticket to immigration in Canada. The thing about the golden ticket is you usually only get one in your lifetime, and you don't want to waste it. Okay, why is it a golden ticket? It's because you can work anywhere. It's an open work permit, and that is quite rare in immigration. Most of the time, in order to get a work permit, you have to have a job offer. And most of the time, you not only have to have a job offer, but the employer has to try to recruit Canadians and show they can't find a Canadian to do the job. They just got an LMIA. This is extremely difficult for most people to have, okay? But with your post-grad work permit, it's an open work permit. You can start working for anyone you like. It's much easier to find a job that way. So the first question that you should have in your mind is not when should I apply, it's not when can I apply, but when should I apply, okay? If you are doing any program between 8 months to 2 years, you can only get a work permit for that length of time. Anything 2 years and above, you get a 3-year work permit, okay? And that's what I call a deal. And it is a deal that you really want to have for the most part, because it can take a while for people to sometimes find a job, to get the work experience that they need to be able to apply for permanent residence. So if you only did, for example, and when I talk about years, I'm talking about academic years, not necessarily calendar years. For example, if you were doing a 16-month master's program, which is consisting of 4 semesters, no breaks in between, then that can be counted as 2 academic years and you can get a 3-year work permit, okay? Now, if you're only doing a 1-year master's program and you probably will only get a 1-year work permit at the end, you could do another program. Let's say you did a program even at a college for another 1 year. 1 + 1 would equal to 3. Whether or not you need to do that, that depends on your situation. Okay, this is just general, information. To have specific legal advice about your situation, you need to have a sit down and have the lawyer understand your own particular circumstances to see whether or not you need to have a 3-year or if 1 year would be enough. Okay. Now, one of the key things you have to understand about the postgrad work permit is that you have to have maintained full-time status throughout the entirety of your program, okay? The only exceptions are authorized leave and the last semester. Last semester, they're pretty generous. You can, be a part-time student in the last semester, or if you have permission from the school to have authorized leave for 1 semester, okay? So sometimes, I have people come to me and they say, Elizabeth, this semester is going to be very, very difficult for me to I have health issues, I have financial issues, I can't do it this semester. I can probably do a part-time, situation, but not full-time. I'll likely say to them, think about just taking off the entire semester, get authorized leave from the school. Because if you just did part-time, very likely when you go and apply for the postgrad work permit, your application may be denied because they mandate that everybody do full-time status. If you need to take a break, take the authorized leave and take off the entire time. The only thing you need to know about that time is if you're taking authorized leave, you cannot work during authorized leave based on your study permit, okay? Now, when should you apply for the postgrad work permit, or when should you apply? Okay, let's say you're ready to apply. You're going to do this. The timeline that I want to give you is 90 days from the completion of your program, or if your study permit expires before that time, when your study permit expires. Okay. Some of you, if you're really smarty pants, you might go on the IRCC website and you might say to me, Elizabeth, the website says that I have 180 days. Why do you say that it's 90 days? Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you why. It's because your status ends. The first slide that Zia talked about your status, right? Your status ends 90 days after you finish being a full-time student, okay? So if you applied after the 90 days, you don't have student status anymore. You actually have to file a restoration to restore your status, and you cannot work while waiting for your work permit at that point. But within the 90 days, and if your study permit is still valid, you can apply for your postgrad work permit, and you can work while waiting for the decision. Okay, so if you apply within Canada, the work permits are taking maybe 3 months, maybe 4 months to obtain. And so you want to make sure that you can start working while waiting for the work permit. And you can do so if you have just submitted your application. Now, right now, I've actually was just on a call with the program directors for Niagara region. They are now allowing flag polling for students at the Niagara region. So you could technically go and flag, you guys know what flagpole is? Flag polling means that you go to the Canadian-US border, you drive to, for example, the Peace Bridge, and you go there and you say, you go to the US first and you say, oh, I don't want to enter the US. I want to withdraw and flagpole, go around the flag and come back to Canada because I want to apply for my work permit. Okay, so you go there, you withdraw your entry to the US, come back to Canada and apply for your work permit. You can now do that as well. But in Niagara, they have very special times, Tuesdays to Thursdays only, when you can actually apply for the work permit. I think is it 9 to 5 or something like that, 4 times on Tuesdays, Thursdays? Azia?
That's the recommended times. Yeah.
9 to normally within that time period. But sometimes they may also say, well, we've had too many people apply, so you come back another day. Okay. Windsor, Sarnia may be a little bit easier to do that, but Windsor, Windsor Tunnel, Windsor Bridge is a little bit better. Sometimes at the border, it can get a little bit iffy at the border. But if you want to play it safe and you want to apply in Canada, you can certainly do so. And you've submitted your application, in Canada. If you follow this guideline, 90 days, or when your study permit is still valid, you can start working after you submit your application.
So Elizabeth, before you move on to permanent residence, let's go over the length of that postgrad work permit.
Right.
So if I'm doing a program that's 8 months, so 1 academic year, what length of time will my postgrad work permit be valid for?
If it's 1 academic year, then you should be able to get a 1-year work permit.
If I do a 16-month program, so a master's that's 16 months in length with no breaks, okay, so it's considered a 2-year program by my school, but it's 16 months straight. What length of a postgrad work permit would I be eligible for?
So if it's 16 months straight and your school identifies it as 2 academic years, then you should get a 3-year work permit.
Perfect. And if I do a 4-year bachelor's degree program, for example,
yeah, then no problem. As long as you have full-time status the whole way through, then you get your 3-year.
Perfect.
Thank you. All right. Now, let's talk about permanent residence. The first category that I wanted to speak with you guys about is express entry. Let me go through the basics about how it works, and then I'm going to give you some of the down low as to what's been going on with this program. Okay, so basics about the express entry is that you first create an online profile, and you can create an online profile by qualifying under one of 3 categories: Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, and Federal Skilled Trades class. And when you create an online profile, you get to go into the express entry pool. Now, just because you've gone into the pool does not mean that you have applied for permanent residence. This is a very, very common mistake. People think, oh, I put myself into the pool, I've applied for permanent residence. You have not applied for permanent residence at that point. You're just considered a candidate, okay? You can only apply after you receive an invitation to apply. How do you receive an invitation to apply? Well, when you get into the pool, you're going to be assigned a score based on your background, and also if you have provincial nomination. So every couple of weeks, the government has a draw where they invite people with a certain score. But now, especially since after COVID started, they are very particular on the category that you entered in. And very more recently, they haven't really, they're looking at whether you have provincial nomination as well. Okay. So let's first talk about how to enter the pool. There are 3 categories where you can enter the pool, where you can qualify to enter the pool. The first category, many of you probably already qualify, okay? It requires the work experience that's 1 year, high skilled, full-time, in one occupation, 1 year of high skilled, full-time work experience in one occupation, okay? So let's break it down. 1 year of full-time. Full-time is at least 30 hours a week. If you did, like, let's say 15 hours a week for 2 years, you can add that together and that's there. Oh, one more thing, it has to be continuous. So your work experience, you can't have any breaks in between, okay? It has to be at least that 1 continuous full-time year of work experience. That's high skill. We talk about what high skill is. That is in one occupation, okay? So what kind of work experience might you have? Well, TA and RA work, actually, a lot of students qualify for this with TA and RA work. Now, the thing about TA, RA work is oftentimes the TA work, you might only have a few hours, right, in a semester. But it might provide some continuity because let's say you have RA work, during 2 semesters, and then you have TA work in the summer, and then you have RA work. That TA work might have a bridge because TA and RA in the same occupation, and as long as you have continuously been working, you can put together your hours to equal to 1 year of full-time work experience there. Okay, so this work experience for this category can be while you're studying, it can be overseas, and it can be when you're self-employed as well. Then you have language score. They look at your language score, education, different background and to see if you meet a certain minimum score. They also make sure you have to have your settlement savings as well. So normally for this single person, you'll probably need around 13,000 or so. And then if you have additional family members who are accompanying you, you probably add a few thousand for each. Okay. So that's the federal skilled worker class. The second one that I'm going to talk about is called the Canadian Experience class. This one is the one where last year the government has made it a priority to select people for this class because it was during COVID and they really wanted people who are already in Canada to stay in Canada. That was their priority. And so to qualify for this, the work experience is very different. The work experience for this is when you are working in Canada when you are not a full-time student. Okay, so your TARA work does not count towards this. Okay, 1 year when you are employed, so you can't be self-employed, you can't start a business and hire yourself. Okay, you can't get money under the table. You need to, when you go to a job, you should be able to get a T4 at the end, which is, when you're filing your taxes, shows that you're an employee. Okay, and that is the most important part. Certainly you have to have language points, etc. The language score to get into the pool is not the most important. Yes, you'll need it to get into the pool, but most of you will have that. It's the language points that you need to get out of the pool that is where we see it separates the people who get in and people who can't. Okay, so the work experience for this one's very, very different. I'm not going to talk too much about the third category called skilled trades. That's more for the construction trades. All right, so let's say you've gone into the pool. What kind of score can you get, though, in order to get out of the pool? So one of the first things we look at is age. Unfortunately, with age, once you start turning 30, every year is no longer that great, okay? I mean, in life, it's great. I love I love turning older, actually, in life, but in immigration, not so great. Every in your 30s, every year, it's a -5, -6 points, 40, -10, -11 points. By the time you get to 45, the good news is it doesn't go down anymore. But the bad news is that your points for age is 0. 0 compared to someone in their 20s who have 100, 110 points. It's a real disadvantage. Not a lot you can do about age, except you should apply when you can, okay? Education is very important. You guys, with your master's and PhD, you guys are the cream of the crop. That is fantastic. Language, very, very important. If you don't have work experience in Canada, then in order to have any kind of chance, normally we're looking at, for IELTS, we're looking at 7 in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening. Or CELPIP, it's a 9. If you don't have any of the work experience in Canada, that's similar to the Canadian experience class, because the work experience in Canada, that's the same as the Canadian experience class work experience, except it's 10 years, and within the last 10 years. In the Canadian experience classes, within 3 years of application. That gives you significant points as well. Foreign work experience, if you have work experience outside of Canada, that can also count towards your work experience. Also, if you're in Canada and you're working remotely for a company outside of Canada, you're not getting, they're paying you from their company outside of Canada, that can also count towards foreign work experience as well. Spouse, depends on your spouse's background. It may add or take away some points depending on your spouse's background. By the way, who is a spouse? A spouse is someone who you're married to, or if you're common law. And what is common law? Common law is when you have lived with a person in a conjugal relationship for at least 1 year, okay? 1 year, 1 year anniversary of when you started living together. Whether or not you should celebrate that or not, you should at least mark it, because that's when you become family in immigration's eyes. And this is important whether or not you guys, feel like your relationship is that strong or not. It is important because when you declare anything on your forms, when you're applying for permanent residence, when you're applying for work permit, study permit, they'll always ask you, what is your marital status? Have you been in a common law relationship before? Are you in a common law relationship now? And if the answer is yes, then you have to state yes. Otherwise, it will be a misrepresentation, which could bar you from Canada for up to 5 years, for 5 years. So basically, this is something that is very, very important for you guys to understand who is your spouse, okay? Provincial nominee program, we're going to talk about that in a bit, but it has to be express entry linked provincial nominee program. It can't just be any provincial nomination. Your previous study in Canada, so if you studied your master's, PhD, you get 30 points. Arranged employment points, you only get if you have an employer-specific work permit and you have worked there for at least 1 year, and you will have a contract for 1.5 years. So if you have your post-grad work permit, it won't work. If you have a postdoc work permit, which is employer-specific, it could work, but you have to have worked there for at least 1 year. and you have to have a contract for, like, say, a year and a half to 2 years more. Siblings, you get 15 points if they're Canadians or permanent residents in Canada. Fluency in French is a big differentiator, and we're going to talk about this even more with express entry. But if you are fluent in French, certainly you're very lucky. This could help you a lot. Okay. Trade certification is only for the construction trades and such, so don't worry about that. Okay, so this is the ranking system, and this is how you're going to get points. Now, here's what's been happening with express entry. So last year with express entry, the points were so low, unprecedented. At one point, they just invited everybody in the pool who qualified under the Canadian experience class, not the federal skilled worker class, Canadian experience class. And then it was all really low in 300s, etc., until suddenly in October, they just stopped inviting people for express entry. The only people they invited were people who had provincial nominations. So we're a little bit puzzled. We're wondering what's happening. I mean, there was a new minister, they had an election, a new minister came in. So we were wondering, maybe they're trying to figure out what's going on with the new minister. And in January, there was a secret memo, internal memo that was leaked out to the public. And essentially what happened is, in the memo, it said that the IRCC had basically invited way too many people. They filled up the inventory for this year, last year in November. So what that means is they basically don't have any capacity for people to get permanent residence this year that are new, because they already had enough people in the inventory for from November. And so up to this point, they have not yet issued any invitations for people under express entry, except for those who have provincial nomination. Now, the minister did say that they will start inviting people again. Didn't say when. I'm speculating, and it's purely an Elizabeth speculation, okay? Nobody has ever told me anything, but I'm thinking that maybe in the latter half of this year, they might start inviting people, because, express entry normally takes around 6 months to process. And if they start inviting people in June or beyond, then they could say that they're landing for 2023 and not this year. Okay. So talking about provincial nomination programs, because these are the only ones that are getting nominated, what exactly are they? Provincial nominee programs are programs where the provinces get to select who they want to get permanent residence. So normally, express entry is a federal program. The federal government is responsible for immigration, but the federal government has also made an agreement with each province to allow each province to select their own people that they want to get permanent residence. And so Ontario's provincial nominee program is called OIMP, Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. And there are different kinds of provincial nominee programs. There are express entry linked streams and non-express entry linked streams. So I'm going to talk about express entry linked streams. Zia is going to talk about the non-express entry linked streams. Okay. What express entry linked streams are if you get nominated with this, then you get 600 points added to your score for express entry, okay, and your provincial nominee. So you're assured that you will be invited to apply for permanent residence, essentially, okay, through express entry. So how does it work for Ontario? Well, the first thing you have to know for Ontario is that in Ontario, you can't apply directly for any of these programs. Okay, it's kind of like you know that dating site Bumble, where the men, you can't just go and contact the women directly. Okay, the women have to see, they get to see who's in the pool, and if they like them, they'll contact the men and then they can interact. Okay, so this is kind of like that. The province is kind of like women. The province goes into the pool. You have to be in the pool in order for them to see you. Okay, they'll go into the pool and they'll see who they like, and if they like that person, they'll invite them to apply. Okay, they'll send them a notification of interest. So who do they like? Well, there are three categories that the government has said that they might look into. The first one is called the human capital stream. And they have identified that they like tech people. So they're the tech draws, okay? So if you have a background in one of the tech occupations and your score is at a certain level, they might invite you to apply. There are other things such as other occupations they've invited. Sometimes they might look at people who have job offers, etc. Okay, so that's one stream. The second one is our French speaking people, right? Lucky French speakers. If you have a CLB level of 7, okay, then you might also be invited as well if you're in the pool and you've done your French exam. Skilled trades. Let's say you have a spouse who is in the construction trades or is a baker, okay? If they were to work for 1 year in Ontario in one of the trades in the last 2 years, they could also, and they're in the pool, they could also be invited. Okay, so these are the 3 categories for OIMP, that's express entry linked. Now, if you're looking at this and getting a little depressed, don't worry. We have some other options for you this year and that we're going to talk about. And also new programs do come up. All of you guys who have registered with us, we're going to also put you on our list of people who are going to send you the news about immigration that, you know, we have these newsletters. It's not about advertising. We just want to get information to you about new things that are, you know, new things that will come up, because immigration law in Canada changes so fast that once this is over, you know, laws will change, and the only way we can, you know, get you the news is through the newsletters. Okay, so we'll automatically sign you up for that. Certainly, if you don't want to hear about it, you can always disengage as well. Okay. All right, Zia, let's give them some better news about what they can do for permanent residents.
Yeah, so Elizabeth's gone through OIMP's express entry streams, but Ontario also has streams that work outside of express entry. So you don't need to qualify for or have an express entry profile first. Okay. Now, for all of these non-express entry streams, for all of Ontario's non-express entry streams, as of last year, Ontario implemented an expression of interest system. So what this means is that in the system, you first have to create a profile in Ontario's pool. And then once you create a profile, you get a score. Based on your score, Ontario does draws and invites the highest scoring individuals to apply to the province. Now, Ontario's system looks at factors like if you have a job offer, so different factors about your job offer, if you have Canadian work experience, your education, really looking at your field of study along with the highest level of education that you've completed, your language ability, your language proficiency. They look at points, so they look at, you know, what your level is, your CLB level, as well as whether you're proficient in 1 or 2 of the official languages. And they also do look at where you study. Okay, so you can see here there's many different factors that Ontario puts into their point system. What we don't see here, though, is anything about age, which was a huge factor in the express entry system. We also don't see any points being allocated to your marital status or your spouse's background. So we're only looking at the principal applicant's background. Now, one of the biggest differences with the OINP system and Ontario's points assessment is that each of these non-express entry streams, and we'll talk about the different streams in a moment, but each of the streams has a different combination of the factors that they look at that makes up their points system. So depending on the stream you qualify for, there's a different combination of which factors applies to you. And then additionally, you go into, once you create a profile, you go into the pool specifically for your stream. So it's not a general pool of applicants like we see with express entry. In Ontario, for their non-express entry streams, you qualify for a particular stream and you go into that particular stream's pool of candidates, right? And so when Ontario does draws, they're only comparing you and they're only picking against other candidates that qualify in the same program that you do. Now, like I said, in a moment, we'll talk about the different streams. You may see that you qualify for multiple streams. And so in those cases, you would have to create multiple profiles to go into the different pools that you qualify for. So again, once you qualify, you go into a pool of applicants, and then you get a score based on the factors that apply to your stream. And the highest scoring individuals get an invitation to apply to Ontario for that particular program. Now, Ontario does several draws for each of these streams over the course of the year. However, we don't, or Ontario does not announce in advance when they're going to do draws or how large that draw is going to be, what the minimum score is going to be for that particular draw. None of that's announced in advance. So if you do qualify for one of the programs, it is important to try and go into that pool as soon as possible so that you're a part of as many draws as you could qualify for. Let's take a look.
Oh, sorry, Zia, I just wanted to sort of go over some thoughts about whether someone should think about going to this or going through express entry. The processing times for the non-express entry streams are around 1.5 to 2 years, okay, which is much longer than express entry, but longer is better than never as well. So,
well, that and also when you can qualify to go and start this process is also could be different, right? So if someone's a new graduate, we're going to talk about the programs in a moment, but as soon as you finish your program of study, you may be eligible to apply through one of these streams right away. Whereas with express entry, you may need to wait a year till you get that year of work experience, and then you're eligible to go into the pool, right? So there's many different factors to consider. One of them is certainly the processing times, and these non-express entry streams are certainly much longer than applying through any of the express entry programs. But comparatively, it may actually end up being the same time from when you graduate to when you get permanent residence if you have to wait a year to qualify to go into the express entry pool.
Yeah, really great points. Yeah. Okay, all right.
So let's take a look at these streams so we know what exactly it is that we can qualify for. Ontario has programs specific to individuals who have finished their master's or PhD here in Ontario. There is a timeline though as to when you have to apply by. So for the master's and PhD streams, you have to apply within 2 years of your graduation. Now, specifically, we're looking at the date that's listed on your diploma itself, right? So on that master's degree, on your PhD degree, there's a date that degree has been awarded to. You have 2 years from that date to apply through either the master's or the PhD stream. For both of these programs, really important that you don't need a job offer. So as soon as you finish your program of study, and this is what I was kind of alluding to before, as soon as you finish your program of study, you can go ahead and apply through the master's, or at least create a profile and go into the pool for these programs. And you do not need to be working, you do not need to have work experience, and you don't necessarily need to have a job offer when you're starting this program. But at the same time, Ontario is looking for individuals that are ready to enter the labor market. So for someone who's not looking to pursue further studies. And we see this more so for the master's stream. So someone who's finished their master's may be thinking about going and doing their PhD as soon as they're done. But if you do that, then you wouldn't be able to apply through the master's stream at this time. Because like I said, Ontario is looking for people who are looking to start working right away. And then lastly, with these master's and PhD streams, it does fall under the non-express entry routes, so it is subject to the expression of interest system that we just talked about. Ontario, aside from these master's and PhD stream, there are what are called the employer-based streams. So this is for individuals with a permanent full-time job offer, and we'll talk about the position requirements in a moment, but specifically for individuals who have a full-time job offer here in Ontario from an Ontario employer, you may be able to go through the employer-based streams. Again, the new expression of interest system does apply to this, to all the streams for the employer-based categories. Now, when we talk about,
sorry, Zia, I just wanted to kind of say, why is it that we're talking about the employer-based streams and not just ending with the master's and PhD? Because all of these guys, you know, when they graduate, they should qualify for master's or PhD, right? So why do we even need to talk about anything else? It's because the master's and PhD streams are likely to be very, very full, especially this year. They have been in previous years, but this year especially is going to be very, very full. And a lot of people may not be able to get selected for these streams. So you don't have to just enter yourself in the master's or PhD stream. You can also enter yourself in these streams as well. And these streams, if you have the job offer, you may be in a better position to get selected than the master's or PhD streams.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point, Elizabeth. Yeah, the master's stream especially has been very competitive, and that's when they moved it over to that expression of interest system. But even now, because of the way that the points are allocated, it can sometimes be hard to get that invitation. And so we do want to consider all the different options that are available to you when you're looking to apply for your permanent residence. So looking at the employer-based streams, there's 3 streams that fall under this employer-based programs. But before we talk about the specific requirements and the differences between these programs, like I said before, all of these programs do require a company who is supporting your application for permanent residence. Okay, so all of these programs have requirements on you as the applicant, on the company that's supporting the application, and on the position that you're using for this permanent residence program. So let's first look at the employer requirements. The company that's supporting your application for permanent residence, if they're inside of the GTA, if they're located within the Greater Toronto Area, then they do need to have gross income in the past fiscal year of at least 1 million. And at the time of your application, they need to have at least 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees. Those numbers decrease if we're talking about an employer that's located outside of the Greater Toronto Area. So for a company outside of the GTA, those numbers decrease to a gross income of 500,000 in the past fiscal year and 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees at the time of your application. Regardless of where the employer is located, though, they do have to have been in business for at least 3 years, okay? And the position has to be full-time. The position that they're offering you has to be a permanent full-time position. When we're talking about a permanent position, what we're looking for is one that's of an indeterminate length. So there's no end date that's on your contract or your contract of employment. If, for example, your contract says this is valid for 2 years, that's not considered an indeterminate contract. There cannot be an end date that's listed on your contract of employment. Now, with that, those are the employer requirements for these employer job offer streams. So let's take a look at these three different categories. The first one I want to look at is the international student stream. So this is for students who have studied here in Ontario and have completed a program of study. Again, you do have to apply within 2 years of finishing your program. And there are specific programs that will qualify you for this international student stream. So either you've done a program that's at least 2 years in length, or you've done a 1-year postgraduate program. Now, when we look at programs that are 1 year in length, so the 1-year postgraduate program, what OINP is looking for is they're looking at the admission requirements for the program of study that you completed. And specifically, they're looking to see that the program that you studied in requires a degree as an admission requirement in order for you to be admitted to it and pursue that program. So this is really important.
Oh, sorry. So all of you guys who have your master's, you're doing a master's or PhD, you should qualify for this.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Now, aside from having completed a program of study here in Ontario, again, you do have to have that job offer. The job offer has to be high skilled. The salary requirements are a bit lower than some of the other programs. It's at the entry level wage. But really important here with the international student stream, you do not need to have any work experience. So again, this is another example of a program that you can apply for as soon as you finish your program of study before you've worked at all in Canada. You just have to have that job offer ready to go. The second program through the employer-based streams is for skilled workers. Okay, now with the skilled worker stream, we're not looking at education, we're not looking at where you've studied, what your program of study is. Instead, we're looking to see that you have 2 years of work experience within the past 5 years, and that work experience has to be in the same occupation as the position that you're using to support your application. Okay, so the job offer that you're being provided by the company here in Ontario, that specific occupation that you're getting the job offer in, you have to be able to show that in the past 5 years, you have at least 2 years of work experience, 2 years of full-time or the equivalent in part-time work experience. That work experience does not have to be in Ontario or in Canada. It can be anywhere in the world. It just has to be within the past 5 years. Additionally, with the skilled worker stream, the salary that's being offered to you does have to meet the median wage. Now, you may be thinking, like we brought up earlier, you may be thinking, why are we talking about the skilled worker stream? You're here studying. Well, when we're talking about immigration, you know, we want to look at your family unit. It may be that you're here studying right now, but your spouse here is working, has a full-time position. Well, when you're looking at immigration options, it may be that your spouse is able to apply for permanent residence through the Ontario program sooner than when you finish your program of study here. And so you always want to consider options, not just for you as the international student, but maybe your spouse is able to apply sooner for your permanent residence. That's why it's important to think about all these different programs that are available. And then the final program that falls under this employer-based streams for Ontario is the in-demand occupations. So this particular program, there is a list of occupations that Ontario is considering as being eligible for this program. So you have to have a job offer in a position that's listed on Ontario's list for this in-demand occupations program. Additionally, you have to have at least 9 months of work experience, specifically in Ontario, in the same occupation. Now, when we look at this occupations list, majority of the occupations that are listed on there are all low-skilled work. Okay, this is the only program that we have in Ontario that includes low-skilled positions. Okay, so it's a great program, and it's an opportunity for those that are working in a low-skilled occupation, especially if it's included in that list.
Yeah, and as Zia said, you know, we have been able to use, you know, these kind of programs for students whose spouses are working in these occupations. For example, you guys are in the middle of farm country. Essentially, once you leave London, there's a lot of farms out there, right? And so farm workers, so if let's say your spouse is a farm worker and goes out and works in the farms for 9 months, they might be able to qualify for permanent residence while you're doing your 5-year PhD. You know, they can get the, you know, it doesn't matter who's principal applicant, right? As long as one person is principal applicant, the entire family gets permanent residence as well. So just wanted to quickly go over some other kinds of categories that you may qualify for. I mean, this is really the tip of the iceberg that we're talking about, some of the more popular ones. You know, some of the things you might want to consider if you have a spouse who is a Canadian or permanent resident, they can sponsor you. The other thing you might want to consider is if your spouse is not a Canadian permanent resident, but they can qualify for permanent residence earlier than you. You know, sometimes you have two students, for example, you guys met in school, and you guys, one person might qualify for permanent residence before the other person. Oftentimes you get people saying, oh, I don't want to join us together. We just want to do it all on our own. Sometimes you got to think about, is it worth it to do it all on your own? If you are a common law, each person you have to declare each other, and you guys have to do medicals and police certificates and submit your information anyway. It's not necessarily better to do it separately. It's most of the time, you know, if you guys are going to be together, it's better to submit it together. And that's not considered a spousal sponsorship. Spousal sponsorship is if one person is already a Canadian permanent resident, they're sponsoring the other person. If you guys apply together as a family unit, it's not called sponsorship, and there is no financial obligations required for that. Okay, spousal sponsorship, the person who's sponsoring you will be obliged to make sure that you don't go on social assistance for 3 years after you get your permanent residence. Other things, if you guys are self-employed talented artists or athletes, we're not just talking about, you know, the purest sense of, you know, you're a painter or a musician as such. You could be a digital artist, you could be a graphic artist, you could be, you know, and we're looking at ways in which you are earning money. So if you've been self-employed for 2 years in the past 5 years, and you're able to be self-sufficient in your art in Canada, then this could be a category for you. Or if you're an athlete as well, okay? Startup visa class is another one that we use for entrepreneurs. So let's say you want to do a startup. Okay, you and you can have up to 4 other founders together, but everyone who is applying under this category has to own at least 10% of the company. And if you can get support from a designated angel investor group or an incubator, then you could apply for permanent residence under this class. You know, if you're Hong Kong citizens, once you graduate with a master's program, then you can apply for your permanent residence as well right now. So this is a great stream as well. So there's different kinds of things to consider. Everybody is different, and it doesn't matter even if you think someone is exactly the same as you. They're likely not, because they likely have applied at a different time, or they have something that's a little bit different that could make all the difference in the world. So we're going to talk about some of the next steps you guys should think about. Now that we've done this presentation and there's a lot of information for you guys to think about, what should you do next?
Well, first of all, you want to have an immigration plan, right? So you want to know what your immigration goals are and what the plan is for you to get there. Now, coming to sessions like today, it's a great first step, but like Elizabeth said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This, what we've been able to go through today is at a very high level, and is just some of the immigration programs that are available out there. There's definitely many others that we haven't had a chance to go through, and we wouldn't be able to go through in detail today unless we wanted to spend the whole evening here together. And so it is really important to speak with a professional, speak with a lawyer who can sit down with you, go through your background, identify what your immigration goals are, and really lay out a tailored plan for you as to how you're going to be able to meet those goals.
And so once you have your plan, then you got to actually do it. You have to study for those language exams. I don't care if you majored in literature and this is the only English is your only language that you know. Still, it's worth it to do a practice exam, see exactly what's going on, because it's timed and it's a long exam. And a lot of times I see people whose first language and only language is English who don't do well on it. And I say, so how come you didn't do well on it? And it's because they didn't know what to expect. Okay, so study, take those practice exams for your language exams. Once you know what you need to do, you might need to tweak your programs a little bit, or you might need to do another program just to make sure that your work permit is long enough to get the work experience that you need. It starts off with the plan, and then it goes to execution.
Really importantly, since we talked about it right from the beginning here, is that you want to make sure that throughout the time that you're here in Canada, that you're keeping your status, right? Make sure that you stay in status while you're physically here in Canada. If you lose status, if for whatever reason, you've lost status, you don't apply for restoration, it can make it very difficult to execute your plan and get to your immigration goals, right? So it's really important that you're keeping your plan, your plan from advance, you know what you need to get to, what you need to do to get there, and you're working on it while you have status here in Canada. And with that, really important not to misrepresent on your applications. Misrepresentation can be inadvertent, like Elizabeth was talking about before. You may not realize that you're in a common law relationship, but because you've been living together with your partner for over a year, you now fall into the definition of common law, and that needs to be declared on your application. There's other examples like that, but really important when you're applying, when you're doing any sort of immigration application, that you're not misrepresenting, because misrepresentation in itself carries a huge penalty. Once IRCC has identified that you've misrepresented, it does carry a 5-year ban from being able to apply for further applications. And even after those 5 years are completed, you can imagine your application is going to be highly scrutinized when you're trying to apply after those 5 years.
Yeah. It's not worth it. Even if you have friends who say, oh, you know what? I did it this way. The immigration field it's full of fraudsters. I'm very sad to say, right? And a lot of people say, oh, you just need to do this. Don't worry. You'll be fine. Fake this job offer, fake this work experience, fake this, fake that. Okay. And let's say, even if you're successful, first of all, immigration officers are not stupid. All right. They do check with employers. They do check on certain things. But let's just say you get through. Okay. Still, it's not worth it. Why? Because you won't be able to sleep at night. I wouldn't. Because you can always get caught. And if you get caught afterwards, they strip you of your permanent residence. They can strip you of your citizenship even. Okay. You guys are in one of the prime situations to get permanent residence. You guys are the cream of the crop that the government wants to keep. As long as you do it properly, you can be successful and you can sleep at night. Okay. So there are shortcuts in immigration, but just don't go down the wrong road. And if your application is rejected, make sure you contact a lawyer right away. I'm not talking about consultants, I'm talking about lawyers, okay? Because only lawyers can go to court, and there are very strict deadlines for court. 15 days from the date of the decision, if it's made inside Canada. Most of your applications will be made inside Canada, and 60 days if the decision is made outside of Canada. Oftentimes people will think, oh, okay, why don't I just call this lovely call center, right? Call center people are nice. and they can help me out. And if you call and you get through to somebody, the call center agent might just say, oh, why don't you, I think you're right, why don't you just send a letter to or I'll put a note in your file. Okay, you have to understand that immigration, these agents, first of all, whatever advice they give you, half the time is wrong. And even if you follow their advice and it's wrong, it's your responsibility. Okay, immigration will say that's mistake of law is not a defense. And so even if you made the mistake of law because you listened to a IRCC call center agent, that's too bad, so sad for you. Okay, so what they might say is, oh, why don't you go write a letter? And you go say, oh, okay, I'll write a letter. First of all, you probably don't know what to write. And when you send it in, that's considered your one shot at getting a reconsideration. Because if that is rejected and you come back to me and say, Elizabeth, can you go and help me now? I can't go in and send another letter to immigration. They're not even going to look at my letter. Okay. There's also other issues with regards to timeline, restoration of status, or when you need to apply. So short answer, go and contact a lawyer right away. Hopefully you'll contact a lawyer even from the very beginning, so you'll be able to plan out your goals and do everything right from the very beginning so you don't get into that situation. All right, so this is our information, contact information. If you do want to sign up for a consultation with us, we will offer students from SOGS a discount. Just let us know that you met us, through this webinar, and we will give you the discount. We offer $100 for a consultation for students who have come to this webinar. Okay, and we can do everything by video conference as well. All right, shall we now go through some questions?
Yes. Okay. So Elizabeth, the first question that we have here. So for an international student whose spouse is here, has an open spousal work permit, the question is, can my husband apply for a study permit after getting admission from a post-grad work permit eligible DLI? So the spouse is here, they hold an open spousal work permit. They want to know if they can convert that to a study permit if they have an admission letter.
Yes, certainly your spouse can, if they have an admission letter to a program, they certainly can. Whether or not they want to do so right away, or if they want to go and work first so that they can get permanent residence, and then when they go to school, it's a much cheaper program. That's another question. But yeah, you can absolutely apply for a study permit if you wanted to.
The second part of that question is, so can I, as the international student, once I'm on my postgrad work permit, switch to a spousal work permit based on my husband's study permit?
Yes, absolutely, that's possible. Once your spouse has the study permit, then yes, you could study to switch to that.
Perfect.
All right. I also have this question, Zia. As a PhD student, can I do an internship? Whether it be paid or unpaid one? Yeah.
Certainly. It does depend. If you're a full-time student and this internship
sorry, Zia, you're just breaking up right now. Your sound is really weird.
Is that any better?
Not really. While you're fixing that, maybe I can attempt this question. So when you're talking about an internship, if you are talking about something that is inherent to your program of study and it's off campus, you can get a co-op work permit and work from the co-op program. If this internship is not inherent to your studies, meaning you don't need to do this internship for your studies, it's something that you just want to do, that's another matter. Whether or not it's paid or unpaid, if it's unpaid, but it's something that if they had hired a Canadian, the Canadian would be paid, it's still considered work. or training, even training, like this is problematic, okay? So if it's an internship that is not inherent to your studies and you were to work in it and it's 20 hours a week, right? You could do that because you can do anything 20 hours off campus while you're a student, but you have to be a student, okay? Otherwise, you would likely need a work permit for that. All right. How's your sound, Zia?
Can you hear me better now?
Nope. Oh, sorry. All right, next question. Here I go, talking to myself. All right. Someone wants to explain the situation for MN, Masters of Engineering students. Our programs are only 1 year. How many years can we get with a work permit? I hear some people with same program 3 years. How is that possible? A lot of weird things happen with post-grad work permits where officers, they look at the transcripts and they interpret different things. If you have a 1 year program, it's normally you get a 1 year work permit. But let's say you have, a 16-month program and there's no breaks in between, and the school says you did 4 semesters, 2 academic years, you should get a 3-year work permit. Okay, so that's how it goes. Here is the same question after that as well. Okay, is it better now, Zia?
We're gonna try.
No, it's really bad. It must be your internet. Okay, next. If we have PR and we apply for citizenship, do they count our presence as a student or on a post-grad work permit as the 3 out of 5 years necessary for citizenship? Right, so if you guys have status in Canada, before you get your permanent residence, you can get up to 1 year of credit, and it's counted as half time. So if you've been in Canada for 2 years, you get 1 year of credit towards the 3 out of 5 years of residency that you need for citizenship. So most of the time, you will only need 2 more years of residency in Canada after you become a permanent resident. Okay, next question. I have a question regarding extension of the work permit of the international students' dependents. My study permit and my husband's work permit will expire on August 30th, which is the last day of my study period. So they're saying, I should submit 3 pay slips of Noc O, A, and B. I need time after this. What should I do? One of the things that you could try to do is apply to extend your study permit. If you get something, especially if you get something from the school saying that you will need time to, your study program may extend beyond this August 30th. Normally what the officers are supposed to do is they're supposed to give you 90 days, a study permit of 90 days after your study period has expired. For the expiry date after your study period, okay? That allows you some time to apply for your post-grad work permit, etc. Because, you might not even have your transcript by the end of, August 30th, right? So that's one thing. You see if you can apply to extend your study permit right now, okay? You want to have your study permit at the time when you're applying for your post-grad work permit. Otherwise, you can't work until you get your decision. Now, and alongside with that, your husband's work permit should be the same time as your own study permit. With regard to the spouse, with you getting the pay slips, what this person is referring to is when you guys have your post-grad work permit, in order for your spouse to also get their work permit, their spousal work permit, not only do you have to have a work permit, you also have to have a high-skilled job offer in order for your husband to get that. And maybe you don't have enough time to get a job. First of all, your spouse's work permit is good until it expires, okay? It doesn't expire just because you stopped studying. Second of all, apply. You might want to apply before the work permit expires. And if it is denied because you don't have a job offer yet, then they have 90 days to restore their status. Otherwise, you can if you do have a job, you can always update the application, or else your husband can also apply for visitor status as well. Okay.
Elizabeth, just a quick question. So it looks like the number of questions are increasing by the minute.
Oh, wow.
And if it's going to happen, then if you're going to answer all the questions, you're going to be here all night.
Yes.
So maybe I understand that everybody wants the questions to be answered. So maybe we can just touch upon just a couple of more, and then we can ask them to contact you with the information provided on the screen for like a one-to-one consultation. Would that work?
Sure. Sounds good. Sounds good. How much time do we have? Ooh, it's already 30.
We thought it would be from 5 to 6, but it's going, so maybe like 2 more minutes. So let's say till 6:30.
All right. Okay. One more. Okay. Varun, you pick one. You pick the last question.
Okay. I see this question. It says that if a student finishes their work, say they're international students, they finish their program and they go abroad for, let's say, work, can they still apply for a PGWP in Canada from abroad?
Yes, you can apply for your postgrad work permit from abroad. You have to still apply, within the 90 days, and you apply while you still have your study permit. But you can do so if you are going to go abroad to do so. Okay. Thank you so much, Varun, for hosting this and setting this up. It's great to be back at SOGS this year as well.
And SOGS would like to thank Zia and Elizabeth for sharing their time on a Thursday evening with us grad students who have millions of questions about immigration. So if you have any questions, please reach out to Zia and Elizabeth and to the LLP team on the information provided. This recording, so this webinar is recorded and the information will be shared with all of you. If not, please reach out to me. My email ID is, I'll type it in the chat. Just give me a minute there. And I'll make sure that you receive all these recordings. Thank you, everybody. I know that you all had so much questions. Everybody has their own situation, but we would also like to understand the speaker's situation. They can't stay here all night. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, Zia. And we look forward to working with you again next year.
Awesome. Okay, take care, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.